Happy Friday, and welcome to another episode of BrainScratch. I'm John Lordan. Thank you so much for spending some time with me here today. I'm not exactly sure how it happened, but over the past few years, I've seemingly become a magnet for families that are facing one of the most difficult types of cases to help with, on both the raising awareness front and the supporting the family front. It's the cases where law enforcement assumes that the victim may have ended their own life, but the family firmly believes it's foul play. How can you say no to trying to help a family that is in such immense pain and already feeling like they've been abandoned? But also, how do you respect the truth in a way that you don't create secondary victims, like people being looked at as possible suspects of a crime that may have not occurred, or law enforcement once again being blamed for not doing a good or thorough job? By far, the trickiest part of these cases is a simple truth. It's something that law enforcement knows well, but not all of us in the true crime community have a firm grasp on this unless you deal with multiple families in this situation. The book Practical Homicide Investigation by Vernon Geberth, frequently referred to as the Bible of Homicide Investigation, states that these cases repeatedly cause more problems for the investigator than homicide cases for a very particular reason. Quote, "The surviving family grieves the loss of a loved one and is faced with the psychological uncertainty of whether or not they could have prevented the act. Many times the surviving family cannot or will not accept the fact that a relative has done this. They have been known to accuse the police of a cover-up or to petition state and federal agencies to review the local investigation with the belief that they can change the outcome." But sometimes these cases do deserve another look. Vernon Geberth's book also speaks of how law enforcement's conclusion that a victim may have ended their own life does turn out to be wrong on occasion. Do we have that happening in today's case? 37-year-old Elizabeth Santos was staying at a friend's home after separating from her long-term boyfriend, and on one fateful night, a bizarre flurry of events would lead to her losing her life. Another truth about cases of this nature is that in general, major media runs from them like the plague. Elizabeth Santos' case is no different. One tiny blip of news coverage was created on this case. Alaska's newssource.com would report that, quote, "The Anchorage Police Department is working on a death investigation after responding to a home. When officers arrived, they found a woman with serious injuries and in need of medical attention. According to the news release from APD, she died after being taken to the hospital. Detectives are working to figure out how the woman became injured. Officials say they're not looking for anyone else in this case and have made contact with everyone involved. The victim's name has not been released. The medical examiner will determine the cause of death." One blip of news media, and they didn't even mention Elizabeth's name. And that was all the public knew about this case. But her family thought there was more to it, and they're looking for help. A handful of YouTubers have tried to help their efforts, and the YouTube channel The Crime Reel reached out to me asking to join in to help raise awareness to this case, and they got me in touch with the family. The family also has a YouTube channel of their own that has posted a few videos doing a deeper dive into this case. I've watched the videos, I've read through the police reports, the ambulance report, the autopsy report, and asked several questions, having those answered directly by Elizabeth's brother, to try to figure out not only the facts of this case, but who Elizabeth was. Elizabeth Santos was the second of 4 siblings in a family living in Miami, Florida. She had 2 younger sisters and a younger brother. Her brother, Eusebius, says that Elizabeth was fun, loving, and smart. She loved to travel, and within the family was known as the calming peacemaker, an observation echoed by several of her friends and work acquaintances that makes this case so much harder to understand. In 2009, a friend of Elizabeth's traveled to Anchorage and told Elizabeth all about how much she liked it there. Soon, Elizabeth visited and fell in love with the change of pace from Miami and the beautiful scenery. She would spend months at a time in Anchorage and come back home to Miami, essentially splitting her time between living between the two places. When in Anchorage, she worked at a club called the Great Alaskan Bush Company. She soon found a long-term boyfriend, but they would be in an on-again, off-again relationship for nearly 10 years. In the summer of 2020, that relationship was in a bad place. Elizabeth decided she needed to get out, and she went to stay with a friend and coworker from the club named Lizette. Lizette describes Elizabeth as a close friend, and she agreed to take her in for a few days, but on August 8th of 2020, at 6:10 a.m., Lizette would call 911, requesting help for Elizabeth and saying that she had been attacked by her. Let's listen to some of that audio right now.
And what's happening there?
My friend has had like a mental breakdown, and she needs an ambulance, or she needs to go to a hospital for something.
Okay, what exactly is going on with her?
She's downstairs, but I'm scared now. I woke up to her just screaming, and she ran out the door, and then she came back in screaming hysterically, and then it's like she doesn't even know what she's doing. She like attacked me, but I've been thinking this was happening for a few days. So
did she? Do you need an ambulance yourself, or?
No.
All right, and so were any weapons used?
No. She came here. She didn't have her medication, and she went to pick it up yesterday, but she has been unable to sleep for a few days. She's not on drugs or anything like this.
Okay. And what's your friend's name?
Elizabeth Santos.
The police report states that law enforcement responded to the call arriving at a duplex home in Anchorage, Alaska, the home of 45-year-old Lizette and her 22-year-old son, Desmond. The report is written by Officer Jason DeVille and continues, quote, Officer Yoon and Officer Estrella briefed us on the incident. They were initially called to the residence for a disturbance with someone who might have been on drugs or having mental health issues. The complainant was Lizette Hogland-Hall, the owner of the residence. They contacted Elizabeth Santos upstairs, and she was wearing only a robe and nothing else. She had blood on her stomach and on her legs. Officer Yoon described the injuries on her inner thighs as possibly self-inflicted scratches. They did not know about the injuries to her stomach. Anchorage Fire Department arrived and transported Elizabeth to Providence Hospital. They believed Elizabeth might have been on some type of drug. The hospital found multiple stab wounds to Elizabeth's stomach and legs. She was having surgery. Now, the ambulance report supports that they actually did assume this was some type of drug overdose initially, with the primary impression being listed on there as altered level of consciousness and a secondary impression being poisoning or drug ingestion. Lizette had relayed to them that Elizabeth was given 3 Benadryl by her because Elizabeth was having trouble sleeping, though in a police interview, she would actually say that it was 4 Benadryl, and said that Elizabeth had been exhibiting strange behavior for the past 3 days, seemingly being hyperactive and moving things around the house. The report states Elizabeth was only wearing a robe and had incoherent speech and sporadic body movements noted by the responding officers. They actually had to handcuff her to protect the first responders. But once in the ambulance, they removed the cuffs and used soft restraints. Her pupils were dilated, and she had several lacerations. However, they were noted as minor. Her pulse was initially strong, but as the drive went on, it started decreasing. She went into cardiac arrest, prompting the responders to start CPR and defibrillation efforts and to notify the hospital of an incoming Code 99. They kept attempting to resuscitate her as she was taken into the hospital. Unfortunately, they were unable to save Elizabeth's life. An hour after they first arrived, police went back to the home, but now they were looking to process it as a crime scene. The police report states that an initial assumption being discussed was that this was a possible assault. Lizette and her son Desmond were both taken in for questioning. Jason DeVille's police report continues, quote, Detective Bell interviewed Desmond in number 3. I interviewed Lizette in number 1. Lizette had some bruising and swelling on her right cheek and temple. She had a small scratch on the right side of her upper lip and on the left side of her lower lip. There was a small scratch on her right nostril. She had some skin flaking off of her right cheek. She had pain on her right elbow and left side of her head. She did not have any visible blood on her hands, clothes, or body. She was wearing a dark gray long sleeve shirt, dark gray sweatpants, and black Crocs. I read Lizette her Miranda rights, and she agreed to talk to me. She appeared sober and was calm. Lizette has known Elizabeth for 8 years. They work together and commute together. She considers Elizabeth one of her best friends. Lizette got a call from Elizabeth on August 3rd, a Monday, around midnight. Elizabeth came over to her residence and wanted her to drive to Wasilla. She and her boyfriend Dusty had been fighting recently, so they drove to Wasilla and picked up most of Elizabeth's belongings. Lizette said Elizabeth has been staying with her ever since Monday. Elizabeth stays downstairs, next to her son Desmond's room. Elizabeth has been acting strange all week. Lizette knows she takes medication for ADHD. It appeared Elizabeth had not been taking her medication. Elizabeth was not sleeping throughout the week. Elizabeth would take everything out of the closets to reorganize them at all hours of the night. She would also repeat the stories she told Lizette over and over. Lizette woke up to Elizabeth hysterically screaming several times the past 2 days. She would check on Elizabeth, who was curled in a ball and screaming. Elizabeth would say strange things and mumble her words. Lizette remembers her talking about David and the number 7 over and over. Elizabeth calmed down on the previous occasions. Lizette thought Elizabeth needed to go to the hospital and talk to someone. She never took Elizabeth to the hospital. Elizabeth told her she was out of her prescription medication and had not been taking it for ADHD. Elizabeth also told her that she takes Zoloft. Lizette did not know what it was for, maybe bipolar disorder. WebMD states that Zoloft is used to treat depression. It may also decrease fear, anxiety, unwanted thoughts, and the number of panic attacks that a person experiences. It may also reduce the urge to perform repeated tasks, compulsions, such as hand washing, counting, and checking, that interfere with daily living for people. Elizabeth's brother also tells me that while Elizabeth was prescribed an antidepressant in the past and Adderall, likely for her ADHD, she was not diagnosed bipolar or psychotic. Let's continue with the report. Lizette had called her friends and brother to try to get Elizabeth to the hospital. Lizette said yesterday she told Elizabeth she was going to make her the soup that she likes. They were going to go to Fred Meyer's. Elizabeth told her that she did not have any clothing. They left to Goodwill to pick up some clothes. Elizabeth told her she didn't have any money. They went back to the house and Elizabeth went inside. She thought Elizabeth was getting money. They went back to the store. Elizabeth was grabbing cups, plates, a pink lamp, and other items. Lizette thought that was not right. Lizette picked out one shirt and checked out. Elizabeth told her she didn't have any money. Elizabeth was giving her a strange look. Lizette told her she was not buying her stuff. Elizabeth told her not to walk away, and she was buying the items for her. Lizette walked outside and Elizabeth followed. Elizabeth grabbed her arms and told her to buy the items. Lizette told her no and to let her go. She said this is not normal behavior for Elizabeth. They went home and Elizabeth told her that she had the money at home. They went home so Elizabeth could get that money. Elizabeth went inside. Lizette called her friend, talking about the incident. Lizette said that Elizabeth was showing a manic type of behavior. So, assuming what Lizette said is true, she's identified that Elizabeth is having a manic episode, or what she thinks is a manic episode. But we're not hearing about any steps that Lizette is taking to actively try to help her out with this. And honestly, I don't know if I would know what to do if I had a close friend acting like this. So I thought I should drop in some information here for all of you guys as well, just in case any of us is ever facing a situation like this. PsychCentral.com states in an article titled "How to Help Someone Who's Having a Manic Episode" that a manic episode is a period of heightened energy that lasts at least several days. It may include an unprompted sense of euphoria, confidence, or irritability. When someone's experiencing mania, their behavior may be difficult to understand from the outside. Neighbors, coworkers, friends, or family may feel alarmed, confused, or frustrated with not knowing how to help. They have a list in this article of do's. And in that list, they state, do remind them that you love them or care about them. Remember that research suggests they may be sensitive to touch, sound, or smell. Try to maintain a calm, steady tone of voice, not loud or abrasive. Try to delay or redirect potentially harmful impulses if possible. You can suggest they wait on any big purchases, sudden trips, or making major life decisions. Offer to go on a stroll with them or to do a shared activity together. Don't put your physical safety at risk. Disengage or seek medical or law enforcement help if needed. They also have a list of don'ts, and those are: don't ignore warning signs or symptoms hoping they'll just go away on their own. Don't take things personally. Don't argue or fight with someone experiencing a manic episode. Don't escalate the situation by raising your voice or crossing the plane of their personal space. Don't take them to or participate in an overstimulating environment if possible. Don't encourage or provide the use of substances, including alcohol. It can further impair judgment, worsen manic symptoms, or have dangerous interactions with medications for mania. So Lizette is certainly unaware of these details as well, as you'll see that she ultimately hits just about every part of the don't list. Continuing with the police report. Elizabeth busted into her room about 3 a.m. this morning. Lizette has not slept because Elizabeth has been acting like this all night. She's tired of Elizabeth coming into her room like this. Lizette told her not to come into her room like this. Elizabeth told her she needed to go to the restroom and if she had any Benadryl. Elizabeth went into the bathroom and called her over. She was on the toilet. Lizette gave her 2 Benadryl. She didn't see her take the pills. Elizabeth asked for 2 more Benadryl. Lizette gave her 2 more pills. Lizette went to sleep. She thought Elizabeth went to sleep. When she woke up at approximately 6 a.m., Elizabeth was screaming from downstairs in the house. She heard the front door open and close. Elizabeth continued to scream outside. She came back inside the house by the stairs in the hallway downstairs. Lizette came downstairs and told Elizabeth they need to get her to the hospital. Elizabeth was only wearing a robe and no other clothes. Elizabeth started saying David and murder. Lizette didn't know what she was talking about. Elizabeth attacked her. Lizette said Elizabeth is a lot bigger than her, and she had her hands in front of her with her fingers curled like claws. Lizette said they went to the ground on her back. Elizabeth was saying, I am number 7. Lizette was yelling for Desmond to call the police. She was surprised. Elizabeth was not acting like herself. Lizette put her arms up to block Elizabeth's arms. She thinks Elizabeth was trying to bite her. Elizabeth was still scratching at her. Lizette said that she called to Desmond, who was downstairs in the bedroom, to call the police. Elizabeth stopped because Lizette got out from under Elizabeth and ran upstairs. Desmond came upstairs and they hid, locking themselves in her bedroom. There were 2 doors to the room, one from the bathroom and one from the hall. Elizabeth came to the door, and it sounded like she was hitting herself against the door. It was loud bangs against the doors. She heard Elizabeth in the living room and kitchen doing something. She could hear Elizabeth was saying something, like mumbling and moaning, but she couldn't understand her. Elizabeth was not injured prior to them going into the bedroom. Lizette called the police on Desmond's cell phone. She later heard the doorbell ring downstairs. Lizette came out of the room and ran to the front door to let the police inside. She heard Elizabeth upstairs, but didn't see her right away. The police came inside and contacted Elizabeth. Lizette saw the blood in the living room. Elizabeth was upstairs, and she was still saying random words. She was naked and showing everything. Lizette saw blood on her stomach and on her legs. Also, blood and urine upstairs and on the stairs. The police took Elizabeth. Lizette said she had a bloody nose afterwards, pointing towards her head. She didn't know if she was headbutted by Elizabeth. She was scared and terrified. She felt terrified for Elizabeth and for Desmond, who had to see the incident. I have to say, it's a little odd for me to think that I'm so terrified I'm going to lock myself and my son in a room, but when police show up, I'm just going to walk out and let them in. I mean, I get that they're the help that you're looking for, but the attack that she's described to the officer here seems extremely intense. And she was obviously so concerned that even with two of them, they couldn't fend Elizabeth off. It just seems just a little weird to me. Just all of a sudden, there's a knock at the door. I'm just going to go down and open it. Also, it seems that we're supposed to believe that Elizabeth is in this literally hyperactive attack pattern. And then a matter of moments later, she's struggling and fighting for her life. Was she actually conscious when the responding officers showed up? According to the narrative of Detective Jeffrey Bell, he was told by the responding officers that she was. In his part of the report, he states, APD officers observed erratic behavior from Santos and believed that she was overdosing or high on drugs. She was displaying manic-type behavior and was mumbling when she spoke. Her words were incoherent. Officers also saw injuries on Santos, on her thighs and abdomen that were bleeding. Officers believe that Santos caused those injuries to herself because they appeared to be scratches. APD called for medics. AFD responded and transported Santos. Once Santos was inside the ambulance, she stopped breathing and was bleeding internally. I'm not exactly sure why the appearance of the wounds being scratches would insinuate that they were self-inflicted, unless they were assuming, by the way they looked, that they were hesitation wounds. I know that hesitation wounds are sometimes used to reach a conclusion that someone has harmed themselves. Encyclopedia.com states, such wounds are usually superficial, sharp, forced skin cuts found on the body of victims. These less severe cutting marks are often caused by attempts to build up courage before attempting the final fatal wound. But if these scratches were bad enough that she was bleeding internally, even if it was only one of the several wounds, wouldn't an expert first responder notice that? Aren't they going to check her abdomen to make sure that none of the wounds might have hit vital organs? And if they did notice any, wouldn't that have been noted on the ambulance report? Back at the station, Lizette continued explaining what happened after she and her son were safe. The police report states, Lizette called her friends and Dusty, who's Elizabeth's ex-boyfriend, and told him what occurred. Dusty told her that's what he has to deal with when he's with Elizabeth, and this is why they fight. Dusty told her she takes medication. Lizette also called Elizabeth's sister on Elizabeth's iPhone downstairs. The phone was not locked. She told her sister what was happening. Her sister lives out of state. Lizette said she saw a black and gray handled kitchen knife with a silver blade on it by the long couch in the living room. The knife was her kitchen knife. It was either the steak knife or the knife slightly longer than the steak knife. She did not see any blood on the knife at the time because she was not looking for blood. Lizette thought that must have been the knife Elizabeth used to cut herself. Of course, if that knife is part of this, DNA testing on it might help determine who was handling it. However, everyone involved has been living there for at least a matter of days, if not longer, and it's possible their DNA would be on the knife just from normal interactions and normal use. But there are some other forensic considerations about the knife we'll address later. What about that hour that Lizette and her son had in the house after the police initially left? If there was some involvement on their part, could they have been cleaning up the scene or removing a vital piece of evidence? Officer DeVille seems to consider that as we continue his narrative. I asked if she cleaned up the apartment. She said no. Lizette said she wiped up some blood upstairs in 2 spots while the police were there. She didn't want the blood to stain the floor. She brought Elizabeth's iPhone with her to APD. It was a cell phone that she used to call Elizabeth's sister. Lizette said she is wearing the same clothes she wore during the incident. She thinks Desmond is also wearing the same clothes. She gave consent to have her DNA swabbed. Detective Bell applied for search warrants for the residence and Desmond and Lizette. We were informed Elizabeth passed away at the hospital. She had 11 stab wounds in her stomach and legs. 11 stab wounds. If she did do this, it is actually a fairly rare form of a person taking their own life. One published case report from 2021 says it only occurs in about 3% of the total cases. But in those cases, a kitchen knife is the most commonly used item due to its broad availability. However, of that small 3%, only 13% of women will stab their abdomen. For an act that is seemingly intended to end a person's suffering, this is a painful and occasionally unsuccessful way of doing that. Is there a possibility that there was more to this fight? Could there have been more going on, maybe between Elizabeth and Desmond than we are aware of? The police report continues. I explained to Lizette that Elizabeth was deceased. Lizette appeared shocked and was crying. She was very emotional and asked how it could happen. Lizette wanted APD to call Elizabeth's sister and Dusty. She said that she should have gotten her to the hospital earlier. She knew she was not right. I explained to Lizette about the search warrants on her residence, her and Desmond. She said she was cleaning the blood in front of the officer and had no idea. Lizette said she understood and did not argue about the search warrants. I asked if Elizabeth has ever tried to hurt herself. Dusty told her Elizabeth has not taken her medication in weeks. He has had to wrestle knives away from Elizabeth in the past. Elizabeth has also threatened to jump in front of moving vehicles in the past. Lizette said she should have been out there and stopped Elizabeth. Elizabeth was so deranged she had to protect herself and Desmond. While Lizette was being interviewed in one room, her son was being interviewed by Officer Bell in another. It would turn out to be a fairly short conversation. Quote, I introduced myself to Desmond. I read him his Miranda rights. After being read his rights, Desmond said he wanted a court-appointed attorney. I did not question Desmond further. Law enforcement would collect numerous pieces of evidence, including Lizette's clothing, her son's clothing, Elizabeth's iPhone, and also get hand swabs and DNA from Lizette and her son. No one was charged at that time, and the two were released. But then, a very interesting piece of information would come in. Officer Bell's narrative continues. At about 1700, I spoke with Kristen Sparer with the medical examiner's office. She had some questions for me about the incident. I briefed her about the facts of the incident as I knew them. She told me that she spoke with the doctors at Providence. She said that everyone was perplexed as to what happened to Elizabeth Santos. Sparer said that she was told that the deepest stab wound was only 1 inch deep. She said that she was told that based on the puncture wound's location, it was possible that the injuries were self-inflicted. She also described a large amount of blood loss from Santos that the doctors couldn't explain. How would she have lost so much blood with no wounds deeper than 1 inch? How could she have even been bleeding internally? One thing that might be adding to this confusion is the robe that Elizabeth was wearing. It was pink and described by several people as being covered in blood. However, some of the notes say it was actually covered in sweat. Because it was pink, when it got wet, it looked more red in many places. Continuing with his narrative, Sparer told me that the autopsy for Santos would be held on August 10th at 7:30. I told her our crime scene investigators would attend. Outside of this, we have officers canvass the neighborhood and hear from some neighbors that they did hear a woman screaming angrily in the street around 6:15 that morning, but she wasn't crying out for help, and she sounded intoxicated to them. They checked for doorbell and home cameras, and they did find a short audio clip of just the screaming, but the camera was facing the wrong direction. They really didn't find anything else from the neighbors. With little help coming from them, are there any signs that the story being told by Lizette isn't true? We have her son who won't talk, which actually in this case might be doing more harm than good, particularly if they had nothing to do with what happened. We have Lizette mention noticing one knife, but what if there were more than one knife found at the scene? Another officer who was tracking the evidence found at the home notes at least a dozen places where blood was found, and there was a knife found on the floor in front of the couch as Lizette described, but also a knife was found under a sink, as well as a Leatherman multi-tool, which does also feature a knife blade that was found on a pony wall. We have 3 people in the home, and now investigators have found and cataloged 3 potential knives. However, it is worth noting that the Leatherman tool was found in the pliers configuration, meaning the blade was stowed on it. Also, those multi-purpose tools usually don't have locking blades, making it very dangerous to use them as a weapon, particularly for stabbing, since the blade can essentially close right on your fingers. An officer interviewed Elizabeth's boyfriend, Dusty, who said that her behavior had been changing in recent months. She was leaving the home in disarray, which wasn't normal for her, as she was usually a very clean and organized person. She wasn't usually a drinker, but had recently started drinking at work, and she was frequently spending the night at a friend's house in Anchorage. He also said that in the past, she had exhibited some manic behavior. She once attacked him by clawing at him, and another time she ran out into traffic, and he had to chase her and pull her out of traffic. He also spoke of a time when she pulled a knife out, and he tackled her because he thought that she was going to use it on herself. He told police that she didn't use any illegal drugs, but was known to smoke marijuana on occasion. When officers reached out to co-workers at the Alaskan Bush Company, they heard about a different side of Elizabeth. A woman that we'll call Tina said that she'd known Santos for 6 years, and that Elizabeth is the nicest, most poised, and under control person she's ever met. Tina had never seen any of the behaviors that Lizette described, and didn't notice any changes in Elizabeth's behavior leading up to her death. Investigators would also find that Elizabeth tried to reach out to a male coworker that was saved into her phone under the contact name Hot Boy. He told investigators he had 9 missed calls from her that morning, and that they had spoken about previously dating but never spent any time outside of work. The following day, Elizabeth's sister would contact Detective Bell, and in that conversation, he told her that based on what he knew so far, he didn't believe that Elizabeth ended her own life, but he did think she was having a mental breakdown or episode. 2 months later, a supplement to the police report written by Detective Bell says, on October 19th, 2020, I received that autopsy for Santos. Dr. Gallagher declared that Santos' cause of death was from multiple sharp force injuries. The manner of death was undetermined. However, Dr. Gallagher indicated that because of the lack of defensive type injuries, the possibility of the wounds being self-inflicted could not be excluded. At this time, I'm suspending this investigation. What's interesting to me is that categorization of undetermined, while he can't rule out that the wounds might be self-inflicted, he also can't rule out that they might have been inflicted by someone else, because then there is a different categorization for that. So it's kind of interesting to me that you would note one half of that equation and not the other half. But the book, Practical Homicide Investigation, notes that investigatively speaking, all death investigations should be handled as homicide cases until the facts prove differently. And in many of these cases that I've reviewed, this seems to be the biggest area where law enforcement kind of drops the ball. Even in this case, they initially left the scene and then came back an hour later to process it and take Lizette and her son into custody. But from that point forward, it does seem they gave fair consideration to the possibility that there could have been foul play involved here. If so, why would a classification of the manner of death being undetermined stop the investigation? Undetermined is not proof in one way or the other. I've seen numerous other cases where families are actually trying to get a manner of death switched to undetermined so that they can get those investigations resumed. I'm also wondering how this cause of death could be determined to be from stabbing when the first responders, doctors at the hospital, and medical examiner were all puzzled as to how she lost so much blood. I reviewed the autopsy report, and it states that a few wounds certainly did get to some of her abdominal organs, including her liver, intestine, and pancreas, meaning the assessment that none of the wounds were deeper than an inch, it's just plainly incorrect. However, the autopsy report also says that there are no direct injuries to her cardiovascular or respiratory system. Each individual injury is analyzed in that report, And it notes for each of those injuries that no significant vascular injuries are identified. So it still begs the same question the emergency room doctors had. How did she lose enough blood to die? Was the initial assumption of first responders actually correct? Was this some type of potential overdose situation? Or at a minimum, did some drug play a part in her death? Now, recall, Lizette said that she had given Benadryl to Elizabeth that night, which I've also seen information from her ex-boyfriend that says Elizabeth would use Benadryl to help her fall asleep. And I looked into it. You can indeed overdose on Benadryl, but you would have to take 40 times the recommended amount. What if she was given something else? Elizabeth's toxicology report would actually come back finding a different substance in her. Midazolam. Midazolam is a benzodiazepine typically used by children before a surgical procedure to cause drowsiness, decrease anxiety, and cause forgetfulness. WebMD states it should be used while under the care of a health professional only and is not for home or long-term use. It's strictly used in healthcare facilities. One brand name of this drug formerly used in the US was Versed, and the recoveryvillage.com notes that Versed can be highly addictive. This drug calms neural activity, leading to a sense of relaxation or sedation. Some people may experience euphoria or a pleasant sense of well-being. Most importantly, several websites mention that drugs of this nature, when specifically combined with other drugs or alcohol, can lead to death. Is this possibly a contributing factor in what happened and maybe some part of an explanation to why doctors didn't understand the cause of Elizabeth's death? Lizette says that she was struggling with the state that Elizabeth was in for several days. Did she tell Elizabeth that she was giving her Benadryl, but actually gave her something considerably stronger? I've seen the toxicology report, and this drug and THC are the only ones found in Elizabeth's system. Shouldn't the 4 Benadryl have showed up on that screening as well? I'm not a doctor. I can't tell you for sure. But based on toxicology reports that I've looked at in the past, typically everything that person has taken will show up in one form or another on that report. And there's nothing else on there except THC and this drug. The Change.org petition started by Elizabeth's sister spells out the family's perspective simply. All evidence collected has helped to indicate that foul play has been involved. Our family has already inquired to the local entities such as the Anchorage Police Department, and none have produced comprehensive answers or solutions. And with a ruling of undetermined, doesn't this family deserve a comprehensive answer? They're saddled with multiple unanswered questions and numerous hard-to-understand considerations, like the phone call that Lizette made to Elizabeth's sister came from Elizabeth's phone. In one of the videos posted at Justice for Elizabeth Santos, it details that when Lizette made that call, she was repeating, "Your sister owes me money. She has holes in her," over and over to Elizabeth's sister. In the police interview with Lizette, there are also a few gaps in the logic that just kind of stand out to me. The first being the explanation for the ending of their scuffle. It doesn't seem to include any actual detail. Let's listen to it together.
And I just started like saying, "Desmond, call 911, and I ran upstairs.
Where was Desmond at? Is he upstairs or downstairs?
He was downstairs, but I don't know if he was in the bathroom or in his bedroom.
So downstairs?
Yes, okay. He was downstairs. And so I ran upstairs.
So wait a minute. So I just want to go back. I'm kind of like a detail-oriented guy. So as you're on your back and she's trying to claw you, bite you, how are you defending yourself?
I'm just kind of like blocking.
So you have your hands in front of your face right now?
Yeah, I'm like
hands
blocking.
Up, just blocking.
Like, yeah.
Okay.
Just blocking.
And then does she eventually stop?
No, I mean, I guess not. Only because I like got away from her and ran upstairs. Like I just kind of like scooted my way and ran upstairs and I told my son, call 911, and then he brought his phone. I didn't even call from my own phone. I thought maybe my son called, but...
Someone larger than you is attacking you on top of you, clearly focused on you, and you can just scoot away? And as I mentioned before, the way Lizette gets to the front door, it's just difficult for me to understand, and also seems to be lacking some detail, which it seems the officer kind of keys in on as well. Here's another clip.
How long were you guys in there?
Until the police came, until we heard the doorbell.
And who answered the door?
I did. I ran downstairs.
So you did?
Yeah.
Where was,
Desmond?
no, where was,
Tara.
Elizabeth?
Oh, yeah. Her middle name is Tara. Sorry. That's what we call her. Tara.
Yeah. So where was Elizabeth?
She was upstairs.
So you actually have to pass her in order to go?
No, I didn't.
Did you see her?
I didn't. She was somewhere. So there's the living room and there's the kitchen. And there's like, I just knew that I got to get the police in there. And so I think I just went, like, I don't really recall seeing her. I know she was upstairs though. I know she was because I could hear her the whole time. It was just like, the whole, like, trying to get in, trying to get back in each of the doors, trying to get in, and we were like, I was like, don't.
Is she banging on the doors, trying to open the door?
It felt like she was about to bust open the doors, right?
Okay, so.
Essentially, I'm wondering if these two things actually happened the way that she's alluding to, or if the details are so thin because they're having to be fabricated. Lizette explains that Elizabeth was at the door of her upstairs bedroom trying to get in while she stayed in the room with her son, but I can find no information in the police report stating that any damage or blood was found on those doors. To the contrary, the report states that there is no signs of a struggle in the house. Lizette even explains that the doors were locked, but says she was afraid that Elizabeth would push through the doors because they're not very sturdy. However, in other parts of that interview, she's also talking about how loud the banging on those doors was. In the petition, the family also notes that the detective and supervisor of the homicide division refused to process any of the forensics, even fingerprints that would at least determine if Elizabeth's prints were on any of the found knives. If her fingerprints are not on those items, that would certainly raise a serious question. However, there's already an important question when it comes to those items, and we can see it plainly by simply viewing the photographs. Honestly, it's probably the biggest question I'm left with in all this. If this really happened as Lizette detailed, and Elizabeth injured herself so badly that she injured vital organs and couldn't be saved at a hospital, why do all the pictures of the knives have no blood on them at all? I think there's more than a strong chance that the police either never found the knife that was actually used to inflict those wounds, or if they did, it had to have been cleaned. In either case, that leaves a giant question. Why? It's really difficult to finish a puzzle when you know you're missing pieces. Desmond wouldn't talk to the police. However, he did speak with a private investigator, and that conversation suggests that maybe there was a bit more interaction and maybe even more going on between him and Elizabeth that night.
Like, I saw glances of her outside the bathroom. She approached me butt naked as I was coming out of the bathroom, talking about how much she loved me, and I practically ignored her. I did ignore her.
And that was just during the time that she stayed with you and your mother, is that correct?
Yes.
And would that be on the same day that Elizabeth passed away?
It was pretty close. It was like, yeah.
Okay.
It must have been like 2 a.m., 1 a.m.
Sure.
But technically the same day.
And
either that or barely the day before.
And so I imagine when you emerged from your room, hearing the commotion, there was some damage in the house as well. Is that correct?
No, not really. Nothing that I could tell.
There was no damage, no sort of signs of a struggle or tussle or anything?
No, if there was a physical conflict, it was probably just like a minor slap or scratch, or and a slap back or a scratch. Nothing like really major. They weren't like fist fighting. They weren't like wrestling or anything like that.
So, is this story going to stay under the radar? Or do you believe that law enforcement should take a few more steps here? To me, answering the question, did they find the right knife, is worth more investigation, if for no other reason than to answer the question of why would someone hide or clean it? If Lizette and her son are innocent of any wrongdoing, leaving a question like this on the table is also unfair to them. In truth, I'm a true crime analyst at best. My conclusion or determination isn't what matters here. All I can do is try to honor the truth by sharing the best information I can in the most complete way possible. It's what your conclusion is that's important. And does that prompt you to take further action? Would you take a few moments to click a link in the description box below and view the change.org petition and consider signing it? Will you take a few moments to share this video with friends and help raise awareness to a case that major media has so far completely failed to report on? Will you take a moment to think of what the Santos family is going through? And what would you do if you were in their situation? If you do have any information that can help progress this case, Elizabeth's family can be contacted at justiceforelizabeth@hotmail.com. Thank you to the Santos family, the True Crime Real YouTube channel, PsychCentral.com, Hindawi.com, AlaskanNewsSource.com, the CDC, Encyclopedia.com, WebMD.com, and the Justice for Elizabeth Santos YouTube channel for information contributing to today's story. I'd like to also thank new patrons Arizona and DB. Since 2015, we've always run limited commercial ads for the benefit of the viewers and the families that we're trying to help. Obviously, we can't do that without support. If you'd like to help, please visit LordanArts.com. There you can sign up for Patreon, sign up for PayPal, buy merchandise, or even just buy us a coffee, like Ann Peters recently did. We really appreciate your support on our mission to run as few ads as possible and help as many cases as we can. Please join us again on Monday for a brand new episode of Case Cracked, right here on the LordanArts channel.